The air in the Whitmore estate dining room was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and old money. I sat at the long mahogany table, my tie too tight, my hands folded like a kid waiting for permission to speak. Clara was across from me, laughing at something her cousin said, her eyes bright in a way they hadn't been with me in months. Her family filled the room, uncles in tailored blazers, aunts with diamond earrings, all of them trading stories about vacations I'd never been invited to. I was Miles Harrington, the guy who married into this, the one they tolerated because Clara said I do 6 years ago. But I wasn't one of them. Never would be. I sipped my orange juice, trying to blend into the wallpaper, when Julian, Clara's older brother, leaned across the table. His cufflinks glinted under the chandelier. "Miles," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you're awfully quiet. Don't they teach you how to talk at those community colleges?" A few chuckles rippled around the table. My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile. I'd learned to let his jab slide. Clara said it was easier that way. "Keep the peace," she'd whisper after every family gathering, her hand on my arm like she was soothing a dog. I was about to change the subject, ask about the weather or some safe nonsense, when Julian picked up his coffee mug. It was steaming, fresh from the pot. He looked right at me, his smirk sharp as a blade, and then he tilted the mug. Hot coffee splashed across my face, burning my skin, soaking my shirt. The room went silent. My eyes stung, my cheeks throbbed, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Julian laughed, a short, cruel bark, and said, "Oops. Clumsy me. I don't remember standing. I don't remember balling my fist. But I remember the crack of my knuckles against his jaw, the way his head snapped back, the way his chair tipped as he hit the floor." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a fork. Clara's mother, Beatrix, clutched her pearls like I'd just set the table on fire. Julian scrambled to his feet, holding his face, his eyes wide with shock. I stood there, my hand throbbing, coffee dripping down my chin, waiting for someone to say something. Anything. Clara stared at me, her mouth a thin line, her eyes cold as the marble floor. No one asked if I was okay. No one called Julian out for what he'd done. Beatrix rushed to her son, cooing over him like he was a wounded child, not a 38-year-old man who just assaulted me. My father-in-law, Edward, cleared his throat and said, "Miles, perhaps you should step outside." Step outside. Like I was the problem. I looked at Clara again, waiting for her to stand up, to say, "Julian, what the hell?" But she didn't. She folded her napkin, set it neatly on the table, and looked away. My chest burned worse than my face. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer with its crystal chandelier and family portraits, and onto the front porch. The Connecticut air was crisp, the kind that makes you feel alive, but all I felt was small. I touched my cheek, red, tender, probably scarring. I'd spent years swallowing their insults, their sideways glances, their jokes about my job as a software engineer, my parents' small house, my life before Clara. I'd done it for her. For us. But standing there, with the echo of Julian's laugh in my head and Clara's silence louder than anything, I realized something. I wasn't just invisible to them. I was invisible to her too. The door behind me stayed shut. No one came after me, not Clara, not her cousins, not even the staff who'd seen the whole thing. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking, and opened a browser. I didn't know what I was looking for, not yet, but I knew I couldn't go back inside. Not to that table, not to that life. My thumb hovered over the screen, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd forgotten. Anger, yes, but also the faint pulse of my own worth. I wasn't going to apologize. Not this time. The balcony off the Whitmore estate's second floor was my refuge that night, a slab of stone overlooking a manicured lawn that stretched into the dark. I leaned against the railing, the cold metal biting into my palms, my face still raw from the coffee Julian had dumped on me hours ago. Inside, the family was gathered in the drawing room. Clara's laughter floated through the open window, sharp and carefree, mixing with the clink of wine glasses and the low hum of smug voices. They'd moved on like nothing happened, like I hadn't just punched her brother in front of them all, like he hadn't deserved it. My shirt was still damp, sticking to my chest, and every breath stung where the skin on my cheeks had turned pink and tight. I pressed my fingers to it, wincing, wondering if it'd leave a mark I'd have to explain to strangers. Downstairs, after I'd walked out of the dining room, Clara had followed me, not to check on me, but to scold me. She'd stood in the foyer, her arms crossed, her blonde hair perfect even in her anger, and said, "You should take every insult and apologize, Miles. That's how this works. How this works." Like I was a guest who'd broken some sacred rule, not her husband who'd just been humiliated. I'd stared at her, waiting for something sympathy, a flicker of loyalty, but her eyes were hard, her mouth set. He burnt me, Clara, I'd said, my voice low, shaky. He poured hot coffee on my face. She'd sighed, like I was being dramatic, and muttered, Julian's just like that. You know how he is. Then she turned and walked back to them, her heels clicking on the marble, leaving me standing there like a fool. Now, out here in the night air, I replayed it over and over, her words, her dismissal, the way no one had even offered me a towel. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Clara, come back inside. You're making this worse. Worse for who? I didn't reply. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my chest heavier than it had been in years. I'd spent 6 years trying to fit into her world. 6 years of biting my tongue when Julian called me, the help, at Thanksgiving, of nodding along when Beatrix asked if my parents' house had indoor plumbing, of pretending I didn't notice Edward's frown every time I spoke. I'd done it because I loved Clara, because I thought she saw me even if they didn't. But tonight, with the burn on my face and her words ringing in my ears, I saw the truth. She didn't see me either. She saw a role I was supposed to play, quiet, agreeable, invisible. I paced the balcony, my shoes scuffing the stone, my mind racing. The anger was still there, hot and alive, but beneath it was something else, disgust, maybe, or exhaustion. I'd shrunk myself for them, for her, until I barely recognized the man I'd become. I thought about my dad, how he'd taught me to stand up straight, to shake hands firm, to look people in the eye. He'd died 3 years ago, and I wondered what he'd say if he saw me now, letting a guy like Julian walk all over me. My mom's voice echoed too. She'd always said, Miles, you're enough. But I hadn't felt enough here, not in this house, not with these people. I stopped pacing and gripped the railing, staring out at the shadows of the trees. Inside, someone turned up the music, soft jazz, the kind they played to pretend they were classy. Clara's laugh cut through again, and it hit me like a punch. They were fine without me. They didn't need me in there, and maybe I didn't need to be. My hand slipped into my pocket, brushing against my wallet. I pulled it out, flipped it open. A few 20s, my driver's license, Clara's emergency credit card she'd given me last year just in case. I'd never used it. Pride, I guess, but now it felt like a lifeline. I didn't have a plan, not really, but the idea of staying here, of going back inside to grovel, made my stomach turn. I grabbed my phone again, ignored Clara's text, and opened the Maps app. The nearest airport was an hour away. I could drive there. I could leave. The thought hit me hard, reckless, wild. Leave? Just like that? No bags, no explanations? My heart pounded, half from fear, half from something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I glanced back at the window, at the warm light spilling out, at the life I'd been clinging to. Clara's voice floated up again, saying something about dessert. She hadn't come out here. No one had. I was alone, and for the first time, that didn't scare me. It woke me up. I slipped my wallet back into my pocket, took one last look at the estate, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the glowing windows, the world that never wanted me, and made up my mind. I wasn't going back inside. Not tonight, maybe not ever. I walked down the balcony stairs to the driveway where my car sat, a beat-up sedan that stuck out among their BMWs and Teslas. The keys were still in my jacket. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. The rearview mirror showed the estate shrinking behind me, and with every mile, the burn on my face hurt a little less. I didn't know where I was going, not yet, but I knew I wasn't staying. Not for her, not for them, not for the man they wanted me to be. The highway stretched out in front of me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Connecticut night, the dashboard clock glowing 11:47 p.m. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my old sedan, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and the hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me company. My face still throbbed where Julian's coffee had hit me, a dull ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I'd left the Whitmore estate behind, the mansion shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just a speck of light swallowed by the dark. Clara's text, come back inside. You're making this worse, sat unanswered on my phone, tossed onto the passenger seat. I didn't owe her an explanation. Not after she'd stood there, watching her brother burn me, and told me to apologize. The road signs blurred past, Hartford, 20 miles, New York, 87 miles, but I wasn't heading home to our condo. That wasn't home anymore, just a cage with better furniture. I needed out, far out, somewhere they couldn't reach me. The airport popped into my head again, a crazy idea that had taken root on the balcony and wouldn't let go. I'd never done anything this impulsive. 6 years with Clara had been about plans, schedules, dinners, her family's endless events. But now, with the wind whistling through the cracked window and the burn on my face screaming for something to change, I pressed the gas harder. Bradley International Airport was close, an hour's drive, maybe less if I pushed it. My phone buzzed again, another text, probably Clara, maybe Beatrix this time, ready to lecture me about manners. I didn't look. I turned it off instead, holding the power button until the screen went black. Silence. Real silence. Just me and the road. When I pulled into the airport parking lot, the neon signs buzzed overhead, and the air smelled like jet fuel and rain. I grabbed my wallet and the dead phone, locked the car, and walked toward the terminal. My reflection caught in the glass doors, coffee-stained shirt, red face, hair a mess. I looked like a guy who'd lost it, and maybe I had. Inside, the ticket counter was quiet, just a tired-looking woman in a blue uniform tapping at her computer. Next flight out, I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. She raised an eyebrow. Anywhere specific? I shook my head. International. One way. She clicked a few keys, her eyes flicking to my stained shirt, then back to the screen. Paris. Leaves in 2 hours. Got a passport? I nodded, pulling it from my wallet. Clara had insisted I keep it there after a trip to London she dragged me on 2 years ago. That'll do, I said. She typed some more, asked for the credit card, Clara's emergency one. And I handed it over without a second thought. The machine beeped, the ticket printed, and she slid it across the counter. Gate 47. Better hurry. I took it, my fingers brushing the paper, and felt a jolt, like this was real, like I was actually doing it. Paris. I'd never been, never even dreamed of it, but it sounded far enough. I turned my phone back on as I walked toward security, just to check the time, and the flood hit. 215 notifications in 5 minutes. Missed calls from Clara, voicemails, texts stacking up like bricks. Where are you? Miles, answer me. This isn't funny. Julian's name popped up too. You're done, man. I'll sue you for everything you've got. Beatrix left a voicemail, her voice dripping with venom. Miles, you ungrateful little nobody. How dare you leave like this? And Clara again, you're embarrassing us. Come back now. I stood there, the terminal buzzing around me, businessmen with briefcases, families with whining kids, and scrolled through it all. Every message was about them, their pride, their image. Not one asked if I was okay. Not one cared about the burn on my face or the years I'd spent trying to belong. My thumb hovered over the mute button. I pressed it. The buzzing stopped, the screen dimmed, and I shoved the phone into my pocket. Security was quick, shoes off, wallet in the bin, a bored TSA guy waving me through. I grabbed my stuff and headed for gate 47, the ticket crinkling in my hand. The boarding call crackled over the intercom. Flight 618 to Paris Charles de Gaulle, now boarding Group B. That was me. I joined the line, my heart pounding, my mind spinning. Clara's face flashed in my head, her sharp cheekbones, her blue eyes that used to soften when she looked at me. I waited for the guilt to hit, the pull to turn back, to call her and say I was sorry. It didn't come. Instead, I saw Julian's smirk, the coffee hitting my skin, Clara's cold stare. I handed my ticket to the agent, a young guy with a buzz cut who didn't even look at me. Enjoy your flight, he mumbled. I nodded, stepped onto the jetway, and felt the weight lift, just a little, but enough. The plane was half full, rows of sleepy passengers settling in. I found my seat, 23C, an aisle spot next to a woman already asleep with a scarf over her face. I buckled in, leaned back, and closed my eyes. The engines rumbled, the cabin lights dimmed, and for the first time in hours, I breathed. Paris. A one-way ticket. No plan, no Clara, no Whitmores. Just me, Miles Harrington, 34, burned and bruised, but finally moving. The plane taxied, lifted off, and I didn't look back. Not at the gate, not at the life I'd left. I was gone, and it felt right. The plane touched down in Paris just as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky a soft pink I hadn't seen in years. I stepped off into Charles de Gaulle Airport, my legs stiff from the 7-hour flight, my face still tender from Julian's coffee attack. My shirt was a wrinkled mess, stained brown and smelling faintly of burned beans, but I didn't care. No one here knew me. No one judged me for looking like I'd slept in a ditch. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of jet fuel and something sweeter, maybe croissants from a nearby kiosk. I had no bags, just my wallet, my dead phone, and a passport I'd barely used. I'd landed in a city where I didn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, and for the first time in forever, that felt like a gift. I wandered through the terminal, past signs I couldn't read, until I found a currency exchange. I swapped the last of my dollars for euros, crisp bills that felt foreign in my hand, and grabbed a coffee from a stand, careful to hold it far from my face this time. The burn on my cheek itched under the fluorescent lights, but I ignored it. I needed a place to crash, somewhere cheap and quiet. So I pulled up an app on my phone, using the airport Wi-Fi since I hadn't turned the data back on. Clara's messages were still there, lurking, but I didn't open them. I booked an Airbnb in the 11th arrondissement, a small studio with a bed, a sink, and a window overlooking a courtyard. The host, a guy named Pierre, said I could check in early. I took a cab from the airport, the driver rattling off French I didn't understand, and watched the city unfold. Narrow streets, stone buildings, people smoking on corners like they had nowhere to be. When I got to the place, it was exactly as promised. Simple, clean, mine for now. I dropped my wallet on the table, kicked off my shoes, and stood by the window, staring at the cobblestones below. No Whitmores, no Clara, no expectations. Just me. That first day, I walked. No map, no plan, just my feet on the ground, the cold biting through my jacket. I found a market near Bastille, stalls piled with bread, cheese, apples redder than any I'd seen back home. I bought a coffee, black, strong, and a baguette, tearing off pieces as I went. The Seine glittered under a gray sky, boats drifting slow and lazy, and I sat on a bench, watching them pass. People moved around me. Old men in berets, kids chasing pigeons, couples arguing in fast French, and I felt invisible in the best way. No one cared about my burned face or my stained shirt. No one knew I'd punched my brother-in-law and walked out on my wife. I could breathe here. By the third day, I'd settled into a rhythm. Coffee in the morning, walks through the city, quiet nights in the studio. I kept my phone off, letting the battery die completely. I didn't want to hear Clara's voice, didn't want Julian's threats or Beatrix's guilt trips. I'd check it eventually, but not yet. That afternoon, I stumbled into a bookstore off a side street, its windows fogged with age, a bell jingling as I pushed the door open. The woman behind the counter looked up, dark hair tied back, glasses perched on her nose, maybe 40. "Bonjour," she said, her voice soft but curious. I nodded, unsure how to respond, and she switched to English. "You're new here?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Just landed." She smiled, faint but warm, and introduced herself as Isabelle Marchand, the owner. "You read?" she asked, gesturing to the shelves. "Used to," I admitted. "Not much lately." She walked over, pulled a thin book from a stack, and handed it to me, The Stranger by Camus. "Start with this. It's for people who don't know what they think anymore." I took it, surprised by how right she was. "Camus or Sartre?" she asked, leaning against the counter. "I don't know," I said, flipping the book over in my hands. "Then you'll like both," she replied, and that was that. We talked for a while, nothing deep, just books, the weather, how Paris winters bite harder than you expect. She didn't ask about my past, didn't pry about the red mark on my face that was starting to fade. It was the first real conversation I'd had in days, maybe weeks, that didn't feel like a test. I bought the book, thanked her, and left with a promise to come back. That night, I sat on the studio's lumpy bed, the book open on my lap, a cheap lamp casting shadows on the wall. I read the first page, then the second, the words sinking in slow and heavy. Massault, the guy in the story, didn't care what people thought. He just lived, even when it made no sense. I envied that. I'd spent years caring too much, twisting myself into knots for Clara's family, for her approval. And where had it gotten me? Burned and alone, sure, but now I was here, in Paris, with a book in my hands and a city outside that didn't need me to prove anything. I closed the book, set it on the table, and looked out the window again. The courtyard was dark, a cat slinking across the stones, and I felt something shift, not peace, not yet, but a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Isabelle's voice stuck with me, for people who don't know what they think anymore. That was me, all right. But maybe here, In this city of strangers and first breaths, I could figure it out. One page, one day, one step at a time. Rain tapped against the window of my little Paris studio, a steady rhythm that matched the dull ache in my chest as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. It had been dead for days, tucked in a drawer like a bomb I didn't want to touch. I'd been in Paris a week now, settling into this strange new life, coffee in the mornings, walks along the Seine, quiet talks with Isabel at her bookstore. But the silence from my old world couldn't last forever. I knew Clara wouldn't let it. My fingers hesitated over the charger, then plugged it in. The screen lit up, and within seconds, it was chaos, pings and buzzes, a flood of notifications that made my stomach twist. I'd muted them before I left, but now they were back, clawing at me. I sat there, the room dim except for the glow of the phone, and braced myself. First came the missed calls, dozens from Clara, a few from Beatrix, even one from Edward, which surprised me. He never called, just glared across tables like I was a stain on his legacy. Then the texts Clara's name over and over, a wall of words I didn't want to read but couldn't ignore. Miles, where are you? We need to talk. You can't just run off like this. We can fix this. You embarrass me. Julian's furious. Come back and make this right. I scrolled, my throat tightening with every line. Not one asked if I was hurt. If the burn on my face still stung, it didn't. Much. Just a faint pink now, or if I was okay after what happened. It was all about them, their feelings, their perfect little world I dared to disrupt. Beatrix had emailed too, a long one titled, Your Behavior, and I opened it because I couldn't help myself. Miles, it started. Your actions at the reunion were deplorable. We welcomed you into our family, gave you opportunities you'd never have dreamed of, and this is how you repay us? Running off like a child? Clara's devastated. I've attached a list of therapists, please seek help. I stopped reading, closed it, let the phone drop onto the bed. Therapists. Like I was the one who needed fixing, not the guy who'd scalded me, not the wife who'd told me to apologize for it. Julian had posted on X too. I saw it when I checked the app, a photo of his bruised jaw with the caption, some people crack under pressure. Sad. Likes and comments piled up, mostly from Whitmore cousins and friends, all agreeing I was the villain. I didn't reply. What was the point? They'd made up their minds years ago. I was the outsider, the guy who didn't belong, and now I'd given them proof. I stood up, paced the small room, the wooden floor creaking under my socks. The rain outside was heavier now, streaking the glass, and I felt trapped, not by Paris, but by the weight of them still reaching for me. I couldn't keep living like this, tethered to their voices, their judgment. So I made a choice. I walked to a shop near the metro, bought a French SIM card with a new number, and swapped it into my phone. The old one, the American one tied to Clara and the Whitmores, I tossed into a drawer. No more notifications, no more guilt trips. I needed work too. Clara's credit card wouldn't last forever, and I wasn't about to beg her for money. I found a co-working space near Montmartre, a cramped room with fast Wi-Fi and freelancers hunched over laptops. I logged into my old freelance accounts, software gigs I'd done before Clara convinced me to take a real job at her friend's firm and pitch for projects. Simple stuff, debugging, app updates, things I could do with my eyes closed. By evening, I had 2 clients, enough to cover rent and food for a while. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights blurred by the rain, and opened my phone again. The family group chat was still there, years of messages, forced holiday plans, Beatrix's passive-aggressive reminders about dress codes. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, then hit delete. The thread vanished, and with it, a knot in my chest loosened. I didn't need their updates, didn't need to know what Julian thought of my tantrum or how Clara was spinning this to her friends. I was done. The next day, I walked along the canal, the water gray and choppy, the air cold against my face. I stopped at a bridge, leaned on the railing, and watched a boat glide underneath. A guy was fishing nearby, his line bobbing in the current, and he nodded at me like we were old pals. I nodded back. It was small, stupid maybe, but it felt good, better than any Whitmore handshake ever had. I kept walking, past cafes with steamed-up windows, past kids kicking a soccer ball in an alley. I bought a coffee, sat on a bench, and let the city hum around me. My new number buzzed, a client confirming a deadline. No Clara, no Julian, just work, just me. I sipped the coffee, careful not to spill, and thought about Isabel's book, The Stranger, still half-read on my table. Massault didn't care about pleasing anyone. He just existed. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel it starting, this letting go. Paris didn't need me to be anything but here, and for now, that was enough. I finished the coffee, tossed the cup, and kept walking, the rain a soft drumbeat behind me. A month in Paris had changed me, not in big, loud ways, but in the quiet ones that sneak up on you. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the city, the clatter of metro trains, the smell of bread wafting from bakeries, the way strangers nodded instead of smiled. My studio in the 11th arrondissement was home now, its creaky bed and chipped sink familiar in a way Clara's polished condo never was. The burn on my face had faded to a faint pink scar, barely noticeable unless you looked close, and I didn't mind it anymore. It was proof I'd survived something. But there were pieces of me still back in New York, things I couldn't leave behind forever. Not the life with Clara, not the Whitmore world. I was done with that. But the small stuff that mattered. My dad's wooden toolbox, scratched and heavy with memories of him showing me how to fix a leaky faucet. The books I'd read in college, dog-eared paperbacks that got me through late nights. My mom's old Polaroid camera, the one she'd used to snap blurry shots of me as a kid. I'd left them in the condo when I bolted, and now, sitting by the window watching Paris wake up, I knew I had to go back for them. Not to stay, not to fix things, just to reclaim what was mine. I booked a round-trip flight that morning, using the last of Clara's credit card before my freelance money kicked in. The plan was simple. Fly in, get my stuff, fly out. No talking, no fighting, just in and out. The flight back was long, the cabin air stale, and I kept my head down, avoiding the chatty guy next to me who wanted to talk about wine. Landing in New York felt like stepping into a memory I didn't want. JFK's chaos, the gray skyline, the weight of everything I'd run from. I took a cab to the condo, my key still on the ring, and stood outside the building for a minute, staring up at the windows. Our place, hers now, was on the 5th floor, and I wondered if she'd changed the locks. It was mid-afternoon, a Tuesday, and I figured she'd be at work, but when I turned the key and pushed the door open, there she was. Clara, standing in the kitchen, a glass of water in her hand, her eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. "Miles," she said, her voice soft, shaky. "You came back." I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and kept my tone flat. "Just for my things." She set the glass down, her blonde hair pulled back tight, her face thinner than I remembered. She was still beautiful, but it didn't hit me the way it used to. "You don't have to do this," she said, stepping closer. "We can talk." Julian apologized. He didn't mean it. "We can go to therapy, figure this out." I shook my head, moving past her to the hall closet where I'd stashed my stuff. "You watched him burn me, Clara. You told me to apologize." She followed, her voice rising. "I was upset. It was a mess, okay? But running off to God knows where. That's not how you fix things." I pulled out 2 cardboard boxes from under the stairs, the ones I'd used when I moved in, and started packing. The toolbox first. Its weight felt good in my hands, solid, real. "I'm not fixing anything," I said, not looking at her. "I'm done." She stood there, arms crossed, her breath hitching like she might cry. "You're throwing us away." 6 years, Miles. I grabbed the books next, on the road, The Catcher in the Rye, and stacked them in the box. "You threw me away first," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "When you picked them over me." She didn't say anything to that, just watched as I found the Polaroid camera on a shelf, its strap tangled, and tucked it in with the rest. The silence was heavy, thicker than the Paris rain, and I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I taped the boxes shut, one then the other, and carried them to the door. "I'll send divorce papers," I said, finally meeting her gaze. Her eyes were wet, her mouth open like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "Miles," she whispered, "I didn't mean for this." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because it didn't matter anymore. "Take care, Clara." I walked out, the door clicking shut behind me, and hauled the boxes to the cab waiting downstairs. The driver didn't ask questions, just loaded them in the trunk, and I slid into the back seat, the city blurring past as we headed to the airport. My flight back to Paris was that night, and I spent it staring out the window, the Atlantic black below me. When I landed, the familiar chill of Paris hit me, and I took a cab to the studio, dragging the boxes up the narrow stairs. I set them by the bed, opened the toolbox, and ran my fingers over the hammer my dad had used to build our porch. The books smelled like dust and late nights, the camera like my mom's perfume. These were mine, not Clara's, not the Whitmore's, just mine. I sat there, the city quiet outside, and felt a weight settle, not heavy, but grounding. I'd gone back, faced her, and walked away again. No yelling, no begging, just me taking what I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Miles Harrington, not Clara's husband, not the Whitmore punching bag. Just me. Back in Paris, the air felt lighter, like the city had been waiting for me to come home. I'd left the studio in the 11th arrondissement for something better, a small apartment in Belleville, a working-class neighborhood with graffiti on the walls and music spilling from open windows. It was a two-room place above a bakery, with a tiny kitchen, a bed that didn't creak, and a view of the street where old men played chess on folding tables. I'd used my freelance money to pay the deposit, no more leaning on Clara's credit card, and when I carried my 2 boxes from New York up the stairs, it felt like a fresh start. The toolbox, the books, the Polaroid camera, they found spots on a shelf I'd bought from a second-hand shop, and I liked seeing them there, pieces of me that didn't belong to anyone else. A few days after settling in, I stopped by Isabel's bookstore to return the stranger. She was behind the counter, sorting a stack of paperbacks, and looked up with that faint smile of hers. "Finished it?" she asked, taking the book. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the shelf. "Made me think too much." She laughed, a quiet sound, and said, "That's the point." We talked for a while about Camus, about Paris, about how the rain here soaks you to the bone, and then she mentioned her friend Theo, who ran a tech repair shop a few streets over. "He's swamped," she said. "Could use someone good with computers." I perked up. My freelance gigs were steady, but I missed working with my hands, fixing things like my dad taught me. "Think he'd talk to me?" I asked. She nodded, scribbled an address on a scrap of paper, and handed it over. "Tell him I sent you." The next day, I walked to Theo's shop, a narrow storefront with a sign that read, "Reparations Tech," in peeling paint. Inside, it was a mess, tables piled with cracked laptops, phone screens, tangled cords. Theo was a wiry guy, maybe 35, with a beard and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. "You Miles?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah," I said. "Isabel sent me." He sized me up, then pointed to a computer in the corner. "Set up a system for me, inventory, invoices, something simple. I'm drowning here." I got to work, pulling up code on an old desktop, tweaking it until it tracked his stock and spit out receipts. It took a couple hours, Theo watching over my shoulder, grunting approval now and then. When I finished, he clapped me on the back. "Good. You want a job? Part-time, cash, no bullshit." I grinned, the first real smile in weeks. "Yeah, I'm in." That was the start of it. Mornings at the shop, afternoons freelancing from the co-working space, evenings walking the city. I'd leave the apartment early, grab a coffee from the bakery downstairs, and head to Theo's, where I'd fix phones or debug software while he smoked and told stories about growing up in Belleville. It wasn't glamorous, no dress code, no corner office, but it was honest. I liked the feel of a screwdriver in my hand again, the satisfaction of a screen flickering back to life. Clara never let me do this kind of work. She'd called it beneath us, pushed me into suits and meetings I hated. Here, no one cared how I held my coffee cup or if my shoes were polished. One night, after a long day at the shop, I sat at my kitchen table, the window open to let in the cool air. My phone, the new French number, buzzed with a text from Theo. "Beer tomorrow?" I typed back, "Sure." Simple, easy, no strings. I didn't check my old email much anymore, but I opened it that night, just to see. Clara's messages had slowed. "Fewer please, more clipped updates. Lawyer says you need to sign. Mom's still mad." I didn't reply. Her voice was fading, not gone but distant, like a radio station I'd tuned out. I closed the laptop, grabbed my dad's toolbox, and pulled out a wrench, turning it over in my hands. He'd been a mechanic, rough around the edges but good, and I wondered what he'd think of me now halfway across the world, starting over. He'd probably laugh, say, "About damn time, kid." My mom would have hugged me, told me I was enough. I missed them both, but having their things here, in this little apartment, made it bearable. The next day, I met Theo at a bar near the canal, a dive with sticky tables and cheap wine. We drank, talked about nothing, soccer, the weather, a busted printer at the shop, and I felt lighter than I had in years. No one asked about my past, my marriage, my scars. I walked home late, the streets quiet, the city mine in a way New York never was. Back in the apartment, I stood by the window, watching a couple argue below, their voices sharp but muffled. I didn't need to understand the words to know it wasn't my fight. I built something here, a job, a place, a rhythm, and it was small, messy, real. Clara's emails could sit unread, the Whitmores could stew in their mansion, and I'd keep going. I climbed into bed, the toolbox on the shelf glinting in the moonlight, and slept better than I had in months. This was my room, my life, and I wasn't apologizing for it. The Paris sky was a heavy gray that morning, the kind that promises rain but holds off just to keep you guessing. I stood in my Belleville apartment, the smell of coffee from the bakery below drifting up through the open window, and stared at an envelope I'd pulled from a pile of mail. It was handwritten, the paper thick and creamy, scented with something floral that hit me like a memory I didn't want. Beatrix's name was on the return address, Clara's mother, the queen of guilt trips and backhanded compliments. I hadn't heard from her directly in weeks, not since her last email about therapists, and I'd hoped she'd given up. No such luck. I tore it open, the paper crisp under my fingers, and unfolded a single page. Her handwriting was perfect, slanted, like she'd practiced it for this moment. Miles, it began, you humiliated our family. You walked out when Clara needed you most. We gave you everything, a place at our table, a chance to rise above your station, and you threw it in our faces. I hope you're proud of yourself, living like some vagabond while we pick up the pieces. I stopped reading, the words blurring into a familiar venom I didn't need to finish. She'd always seen me as less than Julian, less than Clara, less than the Whitmore name, and this was her last shot, a perfumed dagger mailed across an ocean. I crumpled it, walked to the door, and headed out. The Seine wasn't far, a 10-minute walk through Belleville's winding streets, and I needed to move, to shake her voice out of my head. The river was choppy that day, the water slapping against the stone banks, and I stood on a bridge, the letter still balled in my fist. I thought about Clara, her thin face when I'd gone back for my things, her pleas for therapy, and Beatrix's version of everything. They'd given me a seat, sure, but it came with a leash, smile, nod, take the insults, shrink. I didn't know them pride or shame. I dropped the letter into the water, watched it hit the surface and sink, the ink bleeding into nothing. It felt good, final, like cutting a rope I'd been tangled in too long. That night, I met Theo and Isabel on a rooftop bar near the shop, a place with mismatched chairs and a view of the city's jagged skyline. Theo brought a bottle of cheap red wine, Isabel a loaf of bread she'd baked herself, crusty and warm. We sat under a string of bare bulbs, the air cool, the noise of Paris humming below. Theo poured the wine into plastic cups, handed me one, and said, "You're quiet tonight." I shrugged, tearing off a piece of bread. Got a letter from my ex's mom. Same old crap. Isabel raised an eyebrow, sipping her wine. What did she say? That I'm a disgrace, I said, keeping it light, though it still stung. Thinks I should have stayed and begged forgiveness. Theo snorted, leaning back in his chair. For what? Sounds like they're the ones who should beg. I nodded, chewing the bread, its taste sharp and simple. Yeah, well, they don't see it that way. Isabel set her cup down, her glasses catching the light. You look lighter, though. Even with the letter. I paused, surprised she'd noticed. I feel it, I said, and it was true. The weight of Beatrix's words, Clara's silence, Julian's smirk, it was still there, but fainter, like a bruise fading. We drank more, the wine warming my chest, and talked about nothing important, Theo's latest repair disaster, Isabel's new shipment of books. No one asked me to explain myself, to justify why I'd left or what I was doing here. They just let me be. Later, as the city lights blinked on, Theo lit a cigarette and said, "You're good at the shop, man. Stick around." It wasn't a big thing, but it hit me hard, someone wanting me there. Not for what I could prove, but for what I could do. I got home late, the apartment dark except for the glow of a street lamp outside. I kicked off my shoes, stood by the shelf where my dad's toolbox sat, and ran my hand over it. The letter was gone, dissolved in the Seine, and with it, the last thread of Beatrix's hold. I didn't need her approval, didn't need Clara's either. I had this, Theo's shop, Isabel's books, a life I was building piece by piece. The next day, I went to work, fixed a cracked laptop screen, and laughed when Theo spilled coffee on his own shirt, cursing in French. After, I walked to the co-working space, finished a freelance job, and stopped by the bakery for a baguette. It was routine now, steady, mine. I didn't check my old email anymore, Clara's updates, Beatrix's rants, they could pile up unread. That night, I sat at my table, the Polaroid camera in front of me, and loaded a fresh pack of film I'd bought on a whim. I snapped a shot of the street below, blurry, imperfect, real, and pinned it to the wall. It was the first picture I'd taken in years, and it felt like a start. Paris had given me room to breathe, to be Miles again, not the guy who'd shrunk for the Whitmores. Beatrix's letter was the last echo of that old life, and I'd let it sink. I didn't need their table, I had my own. The Belleville apartment had become my anchor, its chipped walls and slanted floors more home than the condo with Clara ever was. 9 months in Paris had stripped away the man I'd been, Miles Harrington, the quiet husband who nodded at insults, who wore ties he hated to dinners he dreaded. Now, I woke to the clatter of the bakery downstairs, the shouts of kids playing soccer in the street, and I liked it. I'd changed my number legally last week, cutting the final thread to my old American SIM, the one Clara and the Whitmores could still reach. The French residence card came through too, a flimsy piece of plastic that said I belonged here, at least for now. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who I'd been before I let compromise grind me down. That morning, I stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee in a pot I'd bought for €5 at a flea market, and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling. The toolbox sat on its shelf, the Polaroid camera next to it, both quiet reminders of my parents, my dad's steady hands, my mom's soft laugh. I'd started using the camera more, snapping shots of Paris, a pigeon on a bench, a cracked cobblestone, Theo swearing at a busted printer. The pictures lined my wall now, a messy collage of this new life. Work kept me busy, mornings at Theo's shop, afternoons freelancing, and lately, something extra. Theo's niece, a shy 12-year-old named Lucy, had asked me to teach her how to build a website. We'd started last month, sitting at the shop's back table with my laptop, me showing her code line by line. She grinned when her first page loaded, a bright pink screen with Lucy's World in block letters, and I'd felt a pride I hadn't known in years. It was small, but it mattered. That afternoon, I met her again, bringing a bag of pastries from the bakery as a bribe. She was waiting, her hair in a messy braid, her eyes bright. "Can we add pictures?" she asked, bouncing in her chair. "Yeah," I said, pulling up the code. "Pick some from your phone." She uploaded shots of her dog, a scruffy mutt named Bruno, and I showed her how to size them, align them, make them pop. When we finished, she hugged me quick, awkward, the way kids do, and ran off to show Theo. He poked his head out later, smirking. "You're stuck with her now, man." I laughed. Fine by me. Teaching her reminded me of my dad, how he'd patiently explained tools to me, and it patched a hole I didn't know I had. Later, I walked the city, the Polaroid slung around my neck. I'd gotten good at finding moments. A woman feeding ducks by the canal, a guy juggling oranges outside a market. I snapped them, watched the film spit out, and tucked the prints into my pocket. It was something mine, not tied to Clara or her family's expectations. That night, I sat at my table, the latest photo, a blurry shot of a street musician, drying in front of me. My laptop was open, and I stared at an email I'd been avoiding. It was to my lawyer, a draft I'd written weeks ago, finalized the divorce. No assets, no fights, just end it. I'd hesitated because part of me still heard Clara's voice, soft and pleading, from that day in the condo. But it wasn't enough anymore. I edited the message, kept it short, and hit send. No fanfare, no second thoughts, just a clean break. The next day, I went to Theo's shop, fixed a phone with a shattered screen, and listened to him rant about a soccer match. Isabel stopped by with coffee, her glasses fogged from the cold, and we talked about books, Sartre this time, how heavy his stuff was. "You're different," she said, out of nowhere, as she handed me a cup. "How?" I asked, taking it. "Less haunted," she said, shrugging. "Like you're here now, not half somewhere else." I nodded, sipping the coffee, warm and bitter. She was right. The Whitmores, Clara, the old me. They were ghosts, fading every day I spent here. I didn't check my old email anymore. Didn't wonder what Julian was posting or what Beatrix was scheming. They didn't matter. That evening, I walked home slow, the city alive around me. Lights flickering on, voices spilling from cafes. I stopped at a bridge, leaned on the railing, and watched the Seine flow, dark and steady. I'd let go of the man who'd tried to fit where he wasn't wanted, the one who'd apologized for existing. Paris hadn't saved me. It had just given me space to save myself. I pulled the Polaroid from my neck, aimed it at the water, and clicked. The picture slid out, a smear of black and gray, and I kept it anyway. It was mine, like this life, flaws and all. Back in the apartment, I pinned it to the wall, next to Lucy's pink website code I'd printed as a joke. The divorce would come through soon. Papers in the mail, a signature, done. No calls, No drama. I didn't need Clara's okay to be me again. I climbed into bed, the street quiet outside, and slept deep, the weight of 9 months lifting. I was Miles Harrington, 34, not a Whitmore appendage, not a husband in name only, just a guy with a camera, a job, a kid who thought I was cool. And that was enough. A year in Paris had carved me into someone I recognized again, someone I liked. I'd moved up from the small Belleville apartment to a 2-bedroom loft above Theo's repair shop, a place with high ceilings, creaky floors, and a window that framed the city like a painting. The rent was cheap. Theo cut me a deal since I kept his systems running, and the extra room held my dad's toolbox, my mom's Polaroid camera, and a growing stack of books from Isabel's shop. I woke early most days, the sun slipping through the blinds, and brewed coffee in a pot that rattled on the stove. The shop downstairs hummed by 8, Theo banging tools and cursing in French, and I'd join him after my first cup, fixing phones or tweaking software while the street outside buzzed with life. That morning, I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching a guy sweep the sidewalk below, his broom kicking up dust that caught the light. A year ago, I'd been on a plane, burned and broken, running from Clara and her family. Now, I was here, rooted in a life I'd built from scratch. The divorce had come through months back, papers signed, no fights, just a quiet end mailed to my lawyer. Clara's last message arrived yesterday, a short text to my old number that I'd seen when I checked it for a client's contact. I hope you're okay. It landed soft, not sharp like her old please, and I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She was a shadow now, not a weight, and I let her fade. Work kept me steady, Theo's shop was busier than ever, and I'd taken on more hours, my hands as comfortable with a soldering iron as they'd been with code. Lucy still came by, her website now a sprawling mess of dog pics and bad poetry, and I'd grin every time she showed me a new page. You're famous, she'd say, pointing to her about section where she'd listed me as tech guy Miles. It made me laugh, the kind of laugh that felt easy, not forced. Freelancing filled the gaps, small gigs that paid the bills and left me time to walk the city with my camera. I'd filled a shoebox with Polaroids, bridges, strangers, Theo midrant, and pinned the best ones to the loft's walls. They weren't art, just moments, but they were mine. That afternoon, I met Isabel at her bookstore, the bell jingling as I walked in. She was shelving a stack of battered novels, her hair tied back with a scarf. Coffee? She asked, nodding toward a thermos on the counter. Always, I said, pouring a cup. We sat by the window, the street outside alive with delivery bikes and shouting vendors, and talked about nothing big, her latest read, my latest repair job. You're staying then, she said, out of the blue, her eyes on me over her glasses. Yeah, I said, surprised by how sure I sounded. This is home now. She smiled, small but real. Good. Paris suits you. It did. Not the tourist Paris, Eiffel Tower selfies and overpriced wine, but the real one, the one with cracked pavements and late-night bars, the one that didn't care who I'd been before. Later, I walked the canal, the water glinting under a rare clear sky, and stopped at a bench to watch the boats drift. A kid kicked a ball nearby, his mom yelling at him to slow down, and I snapped a Polaroid of it, the blur of his sneaker against the gray stones. I didn't miss New York, didn't miss the condo or the Whitmore estate. I missed my parents sometimes, their voices, but I had their things, the toolbox, the camera, and that kept them close. That night, I cooked dinner in the loft, a simple pasta with sauce from a jar, and ate at the table by the window. The shop was quiet below, Theo gone home, and the street settled into a soft hum. My phone buzzed, a text from Lucy. Bruno ate my shoe. Pick soon. I laughed, typed back, can't wait. No calls from Clara, no emails from Beatrix, just this, friends, work, a life that fit. I cleaned up, grabbed the Polaroid, and stepped onto the fire escape, the metal cold under my feet. The river wasn't far, its curve visible past the rooftops, and I aimed the camera, clicked. The shot came out dark, just a smear of lights and water, but I kept it, tucking it into my pocket. A year ago, I'd been Miles Harrington, the guy who took Julian's coffee to the face and Clara's silence to the heart. I bought that one-way ticket, landed here, and rebuilt. Not perfect, not fancy, just real. I didn't apologize anymore, didn't shrink. I worked, I walked, I lived. Back inside, I pinned the river shot to the wall, next to a picture of Theo flipping me off and one of Lucy's dog mid-bark. The loft smelled like coffee and solder, the city breathed outside, and I climbed into bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Claire's "I hope you're okay" echoed once, faint, then slipped away. I was okay, better than okay. I was me, and Paris held me steady. Sleep came fast, deep, the river's quiet song in my bones.